Before I get started, first let me say what a pleasure it is to be with old friends again, and it's a long time coming. I've got a small disclaimer to read that I'm going to read. Everything else is going to be just sort of off the cuff because this is a 6-hour presentation that I'm consolidating down into 45 minutes. I've not been compensated for this address by any company. I must, however, disclose that I'm a very minor shareholder with Dental Recycling of North America, which is one of the 2 leading purveyors of Mercury Separators. I am a member of the American Dental Association. I'm also a member of the IAOMT, which some may consider to be a conflict of interest, but I needed to stay active in the ADA to get my points across to the ADA. My wife also insists that I let everybody know that my frontal lobe is totally gone. I need to convey the fact that given the fact that my graduating class from dental school had 4 women and 150 men, if I refer to dentists in the masculine, it's not based on bias on my part, but based on my upbringing and my refusal to adapt to multicultural pronouns and my lack of frontal lobe. I therefore must request that you not hold me accountable for anything that might offend the easily offended. If you are easily offended, I'd like you to leave for 3 minutes right now while I warm the audience up. Nobody's leaving. Okay, heathens. As you're probably aware, Gail and I are both retired and on fixed incomes. I know a lot of you are probably wondering what happened to my hair. And following in the tradition of a lot of other great dentists, I have decided that the lease payment on the hair wasn't worth being on a fixed income. It just didn't fit the budget. So, all right, anyway. Gail and I did a spreadsheet to determine whether we were going to drive here or take the bus, and it worked out better for our budget to take the bus. So we went down to the Greyhound terminal, and as I got closer to the head of the line, I noticed that the woman who was selling the tickets for the bus was quite attractive. And I finally got to the head of the line, and she says, "Can I help you?" and flashed her baby blues at me. And I said, "Maybe you should leave. Maybe you should leave." All right. And she said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I need 2 tickets to Pittsburgh." I mean, 2 tickets to Pittsburgh. I'm so embarrassed. She says, "Oh, no, it's okay. Slip of the tongue." Wait, slip of the tongue. Okay, so we got our tickets. I walked around the terminal. I like taking pictures of decrepit old buildings and other old decrepit things. And as it worked out, this guy was sitting right across the aisle from Gail on the bus. Gail said, "Steve, you got to change seats with me." So I changed seats with her, and next thing I know, he's passing me the bag with the flask in it. I said, "That's all right. Bill, you were worried about viruses on my floppy."
Where's your wife?
Oh, wait, no. It's a USB. We don't use floppy anymore. And so he says to me, "You know, I was standing behind online with you, and I heard what went down." He said, "Not for a slip of the tongue, I wouldn't be traveling Greyhound anymore. I had quite the life. My wife and I was working for my wife's husband, and we were sitting there one morning at breakfast, and she's yammering on, complaining about the children, complaining about their teachers, complaining about her father, complaining about me, and all I want her to do is pass the jam." And she finally takes a breath, and I said, "You bitch, you've ruined my life." Slip of the tongue. All right. So I never dreamt that in my lifetime I'd be talking like this to even a less esteemed group than this about the fact that the day is coming, or the day has come, where the ADA is being forced to recognize the fact that the substance that they tout is toxic. I've been on this scene for quite a long time as a consequence of my mother having sent me an article from the New York Times, which was the Vimy study. Maury Vimy was a suburban dentist in Calgary, Alberta, who decided he was going to prove Hal Huggins incorrect and that mercury stayed put in the mouth. And so he devised the study where he took a few pregnant sheep, put 12 one-surface amalgams in the mouths of the sheep using a radioisotope of mercury, which had a half-life of about 50 days. And unfortunately sacrificed the sheep and did put the sheep in front of a fluorescent screen to see where the mercury I'm sorry, Gail, they're dead. Put the sheep in front of a fluorescent screen, and what it showed was the radioisotope of mercury distributed to all organ systems in the body and crossed the placenta and crossed the blood-brain barrier. Maury Vimy went from not disproving Huggins to becoming the first president of the International Academy of Oral and Medical Toxicology. And he was just a suburban dentist with an idea. I've got a lot of links in this, and since I've cut the talk down, I'm happy to share with you all the links that I refer to. Gail's going to pass out a sheet at the end. Just give me your email address. Let me know whether you want the links. There are some talking points I'm going to talk about in this also, and a couple of other things. So if there's anything you're interested in, just write it down and I'll get it to you.
What was the year of that study?
It was around 1990. So how many of you, just by a show of hands, were at the summit to save fee-for-service dentistry? Besides Mike? Yeah, hands high. I'm just curious because we all kind of have the same ideas, and one of the things that I see coming out of this, perhaps, is the future and a way to save fee-for-service dentistry using this as a launch pad for it, using the separator mandate. What I'm going to be talking about today is a way to do $2,500 crowns, $500 fillings, whatever you want to charge, and not have to worry about insurance companies. Because in essence, what we are doing when we're removing mercury fillings from people's mouths is we're doing something that's a health necessity. We're doing something that's a cosmetic necessity for some patients, neither of which are covered by insurance. So you have to be able to say, that's not covered, but yeah, I can do one or two of those small fillings for you, and we can justify that. But don't get yourself in trouble doing wanton mercury removal and expect insurance coverage for it. Plus, what you're doing is a really highly specialized service for which insurance companies really don't care. They don't care about the patient's health. They don't care about how the patient looks. They want to know that that filling was necessary. Trust me. And if you do your website right, you'll get tons of web referrals as well. And there's some interesting web referrals I'm going to talk about at the end, because it's been a very, very fascinating journey for me. This whole thing with the, why is it doing that? And it just ran backwards. Hold on. I got it. Oh, I thought you were getting up to help. Well,
he's offended.
Yeah, but not easily offended. I know Glenn. This whole,
Steve, do I throw the hecklers out?
yeah, you've got any hecklers, and that guy's the one I'm worried about over there. Raise your hand. This whole thing came about because of the failure of the FDA in 2006 and 2010 to make any kind of ruling on the use of mercury. I was there at the 2006 meeting as a blogger. After the first day of listening to the bullcrap that the organized dentistry was trying to purvey to this committee, I asked, without my wife's permission, to be a speaker the next day. But I got my brother's permission. My brother's a big-time lawyer in DC, and he read what I had to say, and he said, yeah, you can't get yourself in trouble for that. But what I did was I refuted the testimony of all the members of the National Association of Dental Educators, the National Dental Association, which was an assemblage of black dentists who felt that putting composite resins in children who were under public assistance was going to be far too cumbersome, far too difficult to deal with, a lot of different things. National Dental Educators said it's going to be impossible to train dental students. So as I said, it's been a long, strange trip. After the meeting in 2006, there were some conclusions that were drawn, and the FDA had released its own white paper a couple of weeks before, or a couple of days before the hearing was held. The hearing was held to determine whether mercury in dental fillings should be proven safe rather than be said to just, there are no side effects from it. And that would reclassify mercury amalgam as a Class 2 medical device instead of Class 1. They didn't reach any conclusions other than the fact that by a margin of 13-7, the panel rejected the white paper that the FDA put out touting mercury safety, and set up a meeting for 2010. And I got an email from them asking me whether I thought that if they acted to remove, to not allow mercury fillings in the mouths of children and in the mouths of pregnant women, whether that would suffice to remove my objections from the reclassification. And I sent them back a rather nasty piece saying, first of all, we hear a lot of women who never knew they were pregnant. And we hear a lot about, well, we don't hear a lot about children who didn't know. We hear a lot, children's mouths, the teeth fall out by age 12. So it's okay to put the mercury in the mouths after they're 12, but not before they're 12. And I gave them a lot of other reasons. And I got to speak twice in 2010. And after 2010, they came up with a lot of different suggestions for further research. Oh, that's why it went backwards. I got it. Okay. Come on. Page down. I got this window popping up there. Where's the mouse on this here? Okay, there we go. Let's go this way. Thank you. So there was a organization that of the United Nations that was meeting to remove the amount of mercury used in the environment totally, not just dental mercury, but all mercury. And the global organization that came out of Consumers for Dental Choice, which was an American-based organization headed by Freya Koss, who was a woman who was mercury poisoned by a dentist because she went to have her fillings removed because she had been diagnosed as having high levels of mercury, and the guy did not use a mercury-safe technique, and she ended up with all kinds of problems. So she's the hero, as far as I'm concerned, in all this. So the Minamata Convention culminated in 2013, and the dental aspect of it was they wanted to encourage representative professional organizations and dental schools to educate and train dental professionals and students on the use of mercury-free dental restoration alternatives as a measure to phase down amalgam use. To reach this next generation of dentists, dental curricula must be updated from classroom lecture to dental school clinics to licensing exams. So a couple of points here. One is that I had said in 2006 to the FDA that the anti-banning groups, the dental educators, were saying it would be too difficult to teach dental students. I said to them, it's not too difficult to teach them. They're just there to learn and develop hands. It's going to be too difficult to teach the dinosaurs who have been indoctrinated by the American Dental Association that all of a sudden you can't use amalgam. Amalgam's a tried and true substance, but Prabhu was talking about the differentiation between medical and dental. And actually back in 1850, when mercury first came to this country, imported from Germany, the dentists in this country were medical school graduates. There were no dental schools. And so there were barbers, there were blacksmiths, there were silversmiths who were itinerant dentists who went from town to town extracting teeth on weekends. And they started using this stuff and putting it in people's heads. And the American Medical Association said to them, what are you guys, crazy? You're putting that stuff 4 inches from the base of someone's brain? Have you never heard of Mad Hatter syndrome? And so they formed a guild, which is today the American Dental Association, which has 2 different ethical violations if you say anything nasty about the mercury that's in people's heads. So I'm not sure what kind of fine line you're going to need to walk on this, but certainly and I'm going to give you some facts today that will help you if you want to add a very profitable sector to your practice that you're not going to have to be beholden to insurance companies on. Just in terms of don't bill it to the insurance companies. You have to have the patient wants this. It's not a covered expense. So the picture on the upper right is what Freya looked like after she got mercury poisoned. She had paralysis of half her face, loss of brain fog. She had a lot of the symptoms of mercury toxicity. I have Kimberly Bergalis's picture there at the bottom, who some of our dentists from Southeast Florida, I'm sure, remember. And one of the things I said to the ADA in 2006 was there was a paradigm shift in dentistry in the late 80s when Kimberly Bergalis died of AIDS. And all of a sudden, all of us were using sterilizable drills and all of us were using disposables. There has to be a paradigm shift in dentistry because the removal process is where the most exposure to mercury occurs as far as patients are concerned. So they rejected their own white paper. In 2010, Margaret Hamburg, who had been on the board of SHINE and was now head of the FDA, refused to recuse herself, even though the Consumers for Dental Choice asked her to recuse herself. I'm getting all this stuff showing up again. Who's doing that?
That's me.
Oh, you're a genius. All right. In 2010, there were many conclusions drawn by the panel. Everybody, when the vote was 13-7 against ratifying the maintenance of amalgam as a Class 1 device, they talked about how most dentists wouldn't bother reading the label, because when you see what Dispersalloy's MSDS sheet looks like, if you ever took the time to read it, dentists should have been asking questions back in dental school about all this. There needed to be an informed consent, and there needed to be a consideration for risk assessment. Now, this past week, I don't normally read the ADA journal. It comes to me electronically, but I haven't, honest to God, I haven't cracked the dental journal in 18 months. But I decided to see whether they were doing anything, because they hadn't said anything about Mercury Separators yet in any of the ADA journals. So the opening message in the ADA journal was so full of crap, I had to write an answer to the ADA. And suffice it to say that they keep talking about allergy to amalgam. And it's not allergy, it's sensitivity. And sensitivity is because there's a genetic link to the inability to detoxify mercury. And as we were hearing this morning from Mark about the depletion of serotonin, there's also a depletion of glutathione in those patients. And when patients don't have enough glutathione to detoxify mercury, their bodies just become more and more toxic. There's also another factor that adds into it, like Newark, New Jersey, and Flint, Michigan before it have issues with lead pipes. The effect of two heavy metals together is not additive, it's exponential. So an amalgam in a mouth with somebody who's getting too much lead is just going to magnify the symptoms of lead poisoning and mercury toxicity. So I'm going all over the place, I know that, but you know, you got 6 hours of lecture. And we all know that the Food and Drug Administration has been very famous in its due diligence on things like thalidomide, diethylstilbestrone, Quaaludes, Vioxx, Darvon, Roundup. Roundup was another major FDA thing because Monsanto couldn't get it past the FDA. And so what they did was they installed one of their trustees as the head of the FDA, and all of a sudden, where Roundup can be used in the United States, it's banned throughout Europe and Asia. And OxyContin we all know about as well. Neurofibrillary tangles are something that we see in the brains of Alzheimer's victims. It's like if you looked at the end of a neuron and then imagine it as a strand of hair and took a lighter and tried to light the end of the hair, it just backs up away from the flame. The same thing happens to neurons when they're exposed to mercury. So the synapse becomes greater, and the ability for the nerve to conduct, because of the deterioration in the ends of the neurons, is depleted. And this is one of the talking points. There's talking points on the bottom of a lot of my slides, and I just put together something at home so that when all is said and done, you can get the talking points, because it's going to be important for everybody. If you want to develop this aspect of your practice, you're going to need to be able not just to walk the walk, but talk the talk. The people who come in are very well educated. Thanks. You can keep. Thank you, Dee Dee. Yeah, she's filling my words in as I'm talking. Maybe you could sit closer. I could hear it faster. The people who come in for filling removal run a gamut of situations. I mean, I've seen people with brain fog that we've been able to eliminate. I've seen people with tremors that we've been able to eliminate. I've seen a number of women who, before they got pregnant with their next child, because their first child had autism, wanted to make sure that their body was mercury free, because the mercury goes across the placenta so readily in all species. So, and if you look at the autopsy and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, it's very much like the symptoms of mercury poisoning. And this is a slide that will be repeated. All you got to do is request it. But to read it all down. So what happened was the World Alliance for Mercury-Free Dentistry was formed in Washington, D.C. The spokesperson for World Alliance of Free Dentistry was Charlie Brown. Charlie was was also the ombudsman for Consumers for Dental Choice. And this was organized as a panel of environmentalists. No dentists from the United States. There was one dentist from Australia and one dentist from Africa. Environmentalist scientists. There were two MDs on the panel. And they went wherever they had to, wherever the UN was holding their hearings. And that included Stockholm in 2010, Tokyo in 2011, Nairobi in 2011, Montevideo in 2012, Geneva in 2013, and then finally in Japan. The conference was known as the Minamata Conference because Minamata, Japan had suffered a tremendous amount of mercury toxicity from a chemical plant to a point where so many of the people generations later were still being affected by the mercury. That was the size of the assembly that was there. And it's an international treaty designed to protect the health and the environment from anthropogenic emissions and releases of mercury and mercury compounds. Again, this will be in the talking points, but I don't know what just happened. Bill, just get the upper right. I got it. All right. They've been very successful globally in terms of getting countries and large dental facilities to put separators on them. You understand that there are three places when you remove an amalgam filling from someone's mouth that mercury is captured besides the tooth. It's captured in the chairside trap. It's captured in the trap in front of the suction tube. And then the small particulate mercury that got through all those traps is captured by the separator. And then the separator holds the mercury and puts out the clean water to the street. So it does the work that the water purification plants would have to do, except they could become overburdened and they can't get all the mercury every day. There's also an issue with mercury hygiene as far as the assistants are concerned. So the assistants need to know how to safely get rid of leftover amalgam that comes about from those traps, comes about from the placement of amalgam. I don't know if anybody in this room places amalgam anymore, but the removal of amalgam is where most of the environmental issues come about. And so the whole shift away from the public health and making it more of an environmental issue made it something that that was easier to implement globally, and also these people on the panel were able to beat the American Dental Association and the FDI globally. They were at all those meetings also, and the ADA evidently still hasn't given up, even though the final ruling from the EPA has come out that every office in this country, except those of orthodontists, oral surgeons, and prosthodontists, needs to be equipped with a mercury separator by July 14th. Not periodontists. I don't know why not prosthodontists. I'm glad you're listening. Okay, prosthodontists should be on the list. Prosthodontists did not make the list. I think the perception is that prosthodontists are making dentures and partials, and they're not doing full mouth restorations. But I never thought that in my lifetime I would see this sort of moment. I kind of figured that my grandkids would have said, oh, Pops would have loved seeing this newspaper article. So and the interesting thing is, when you talk about the consumer, I've been brought to task several times by the New Jersey State Board of Dentistry for what they called false and misleading advertising, what I call telling the truth. And the New Jersey State Board of Dentistry is a division of the New Jersey Division of Consumer Affairs. It's not a division of the State Department of Medicine or anything like that. So we're trying to protect consumers, yet they're following the edict of the American Board of the American Dental Association. If I did this and I practiced down south, Guy, how long ago would I lost my license?
I don't know if you ever got one.
Not if you, not if, yeah. So anyway, you know, being a shareholder with DRNA, I can tell you that our global sales of Mercury Separators are off the charts. Let's see, where else can I go?
You still had to take the bus?
What? No, that was a joke. That was a joke. No, honestly, that was a major part of my practice. Especially after Bill Dorfman went off the air and the demand for for cosmetic dentistry dropped, and I don't think it had anything to do with the economy. I think it was the ABC opted to put Ugly Betty on instead of. All of a sudden, people start looking at conflicts of interest. Okay, we got Bill Dorfman here, we got Ugly Betty here. We got more ugly people that'll watch Ugly Betty. Okay, we'll do Ugly Betty. So, the global organization is going to be doing a lot to make sure that this becomes public knowledge in the United States, that mercury separators are being put on dental offices to avoid mercury pollution. One of their big things is something called the Norwegian Dental Nurses Study. Has anybody heard of the Norwegian Dental Nurses story? It was a TV documentary done in Norway, of all places, and what they found was a much higher level of mercury toxicity, symptoms of mercury toxicity, than the general public in dental assistants in Norway. They did a second study on the children of these dental nurses in Norway and found a very disproportionate amount of mercury toxicity in the children. So the IAOMT, I never wanted to be a member of the IAOMT because I read Huggins' stuff and I thought a lot of what Huggins had written was a bunch of crap. You know, he was measuring electromagnetic forces off of teeth and taking the mercury out in the order of the teeth that had the highest EMFs. He was working in a bubble operatory. So everything was totally closed in, and, you know, like Bubble Boy. Now, I know in California they're doing things a lot differently in some of these offices, Wayne, right?
They're pretty fruity out there in California.
They're what?
Pretty well, definitely in right near me, Sebastopol is widely known for this, and one of the leaders in this organization is out there. And, you know, we've had the separators on for a long time, knowing this was coming, but now they're making it mandatory.
Yeah, well, EPA is making it mandatory. When I built my new building, which I was planning, we went out to that Summit to Save Fee-for-Service Dentistry, my team, my wife, and myself, with the blueprints for the new building, and we would sit, you know, after lunch or something and go over the blueprints and talk about what we're going to put here, and maybe we should make this smaller and and have a bigger staff lounge or have a bigger library or whatever. But one of the things I was doing was investigating putting a mercury separator on the building. So I was the first mercury separator in New Jersey in 1997. In 2011 or 2012, they became mandatory in New Jersey. They were mandatory before that in Michigan, I think in Massachusetts, anywhere near a bay, they were really concerned about it. And then I spoke before the FDA in 2006, and people from the IAOMT came up to me and said, "Where have you been? Who are you?" And so I went to my first IAOMT meeting and found that a lot of people disagreed with the things that Huggins said, and that made me more comfortable about becoming a member of the IAOMT. So the IAOMT protocol involves using a rubber dam on all patients. I always found that using a mouth prop on the patient was always a benefit under the dam on the opposite side because it helped them stay open. You have to have a saliva ejector underneath it. You have to work with HVE real close to the area. And you're supposed to work with an air purifier in the room to maintain air purification. Just as an aside, I've got 2 air purifiers that I can sell because the people who bought my practice had no interest, once they saw everything I was doing, of doing it my way anymore. And so if anybody's interested, not only that, I've got a diode laser, I've got tech scan, I've got a bunch of dinars. So if you're interested, just write it down on the list and I'll get in touch with you.
Steve, did the patients notice the change and did they care?
The patients knew in the beginning. Should I repeat your question? Or did you come? Because you said something about. Anyway, Bill asked whether the patients recognized the change and did they care. Absolutely. Absolutely. The patients recognized the change. In fact, an interesting aside is there was a dentist who came to me for mercury removal, sat in my waiting room, and when I brought her back, she said, this place is a brand new office, right? I said, no, we've been here 10 years. She says, I can sense in a dental office when there's mercury present. That's how sensitive I am to mercury. So she had to build her own brand new facility, equip it with a separator, and she does mercury removal, and she does it under general because she's dealing with compromised children as patients. So yeah, the patients recognize it. In the beginning, I did a lot of talking about why we're not putting why we're putting composite resin in now. We're not using mercury. And 3 years later, I wasn't giving that speech. But one of the things that I will show you, if time allows, is informed consents that I used. Because having crossed hairs with the state board, when patients, even though we did these informed consents that said, I make no promise that you're going to get better, told me to refund money to the patient. So, it was a lot of fun dealing with the state board. In fact, there's a guy named Tom McGuire who's, Tom? Yeah. Tom McGuire stopped practicing dentistry, and he just acts as an advocate for patients who want to have their mercury removed. He's what, like San Sebastopol or something like that?
Right.
Yeah.
5 miles from me.
Yeah. All right. So IAOMT protocol also says you should take the tooth out in pieces. So the crown out, the filling out in pieces. So like a diamond cutter, you figure out where you want to make your cuts. And, I want to preserve that distolingual cusp, so I cut inside it, and then I just gently carve away what's left. But my tool of choice is a 558, brand new 558 carbide, and that's basically all I used for the preparation to remove. Then the other thing that we did, I go into 3 types of patients that come in for mercury removal in this lecture, but there's no time to talk about that. We work with holistic MDs for the ones who are seriously mercury compromised, and I wait for them to tell me when it's safe and how they want to coordinate the chelation. Thanks, Dee Dee, you were late on that. So back around the turn of the century, the ADA was sued by a bunch of groups because they sanctioned the use of mercury. Jim Love, I have his name circled there. Gail and I spent a lot of a lot of dollars with Jim Love defending me against the state board. And when it turned into a First Amendment suit, Gail said, enough's enough. Wait till you're retired. So if anybody wants to bring me up on charges before the state board and help me with my legal expenses, we could do that, but I'm not really interested in doing that anymore. I just want to talk to people. So the ADA was able to excuse itself from the lawsuits because what they did was they said, well, look at the MSDS sheet. And the MSDS sheet, look at the high level of toxicity that dispersaloy has, and at the bottom it's poison and it's an environmental toxin. That's all there. It's fatal if inhaled. It may damage the fertility of an unborn child. It's very toxic to aquatic life with long-lasting effects. Do not breathe the dust, fume, gas, mist, vapors, or spray, and wear protective gloves, protective clothing, eye protection, face protection.
Are there any side effects?
Yeah, you end up with squinty eyes trying to read the small print. And there's also something called dilated cardiomyopathy, which I've seen a couple of referrals from that as well. I got a lot of phone calls because of the prevalence of mercury information on my website. And the ADA, you know, they say that making unsubstantiated representations to alleviate diseases, infections, other conditions, when some such representations are not based on accepted scientific knowledge, research, or is acting unethically.
Can I interject something?
Sure.
As someone who's not a dentist, but has had a lot of dental work done, what I found most convincing about this is the way mercury needs to be stored. You have to store it, in a metal container?
There's a slide coming up that I'll explain
Oh,
it to
I'm
you.
sorry.
No, that's all right,
It
Ben.
needs to be stored in a metal container.
I
but
didn't
not
read
used.
this to any. I was gonna read this to a couple of my dental buddies, you know, and then when it turned into a 6-hour lecture, I said I'm not going to bore anybody with that. I'll take my 45 minutes, and hope somebody says, "Oh, that was good."
What I was going to say was this is what I found most convincing as someone who didn't know a lot about mercury at the beginning. It had to be stored in a metal container when not in use, but it was okay to be in my mouth. And that's what blew my mind.
Right.
As someone who at the time was not educated.
Cracks.
And so if you were a patient and you come in, the dentist explains to you why you can't have the mercury in your mouth, that to me is a no-brainer.
Yep. Thank you. No more. No. Any. So I've got informed consents on nerve fragility as well, because you know when you take out big fillings, the nerve could go bad. So you just want to cover your ass as best you can. And all these informed consents are available for everybody to share. There was also an informed consent for mercury removal, and this one says I have reviewed the PowerPoint document. So the people who are there, and I'm referring out to a holistic MD, get a PowerPoint, which also, is that the slide you, what slides are you using from me?
Me?
Yeah.
I hid them because I know you'd use them, but I embellished them quite a bit.
All right.
A lot more
Well, you'll have to send them to me.
Yeah. I was planning to.
So and I got tired of doing the whole presentation to the patient myself. So I made a presentation up. I'd tell them just hit the mouse when you're ready to see the next slide. This is the presentation. and our mission statement. And I could just leave the room. So, ton of web referrals. Maintain your integrity. No red flags. Don't do anything to violate any insurance policies. Just don't charge insurance for stuff that you're doing if you're doing it for cosmetic or medical reasons. It cannot be done in a participating dentist atmosphere. No insurance everybody gets adjusted. If I'm taking 6 fillings out, I want to make sure that when I put the fillings back in, that they have been equilibrated, and when I equilibrate, I try to equilibrate on tooth surface, not on the fillings, so that they're not exposed to any mercury. And then I re-verify the occlusion with tech scan after the restorations are done. And a lot of times it's a 2-year phase because they need crowns, so we'll do buildups first and just get the mercury out of their mouth, and then we'll do the crowns in the following year. And they may need to go with interproximal brushes for a while because those buildups aren't going to get the contacts closed. There are extra steps, extra costs, and a hazardous waste disposal fee is something that the IAOMT is talking about in terms of a code to be added to dental treatment, but you know insurance isn't going to pay for it. Madeline Albright was at a very early meeting that I went to with DRNA when we were talking about putting the separator into our building, and she was talking about how she foresaw a day when dental offices would become toxic waste cleanup sites, especially old home offices. So walk the walk, talk the talk. I'm going to show you a couple of interesting referrals that I got. Start explaining to your patients how you...
I'm getting kind of close on time.
Okay, here. So, cowboy hats or Smith hats. The brims are shaped using mercury, hence Mad Hatter's disease. The people who were shaping brims were working with mercury and went mad. That's an old spittoon. Why wouldn't mercury have been safe being stored there? It's safe in spit. Why'd you have to put it in a tightly closed jar? And I had a tightly closed jar in my office, and I saw the mercury vapor eat through the lid of it. I'll close with this one. This was the Williamsburg Savings Bank in Brooklyn, right across the street from the Barclays Center. It was the tallest building in Brooklyn, and it was the home to a lot of dental specialty offices. I know that because my dad was a dental specialist in Brooklyn, but not there. This is the lobby of the bank. You walk into the lobby of the bank, and you don't smell money, you smell clove. That's how many dental offices were in the building. I got word of the fact that the building was being sold to Magic Johnson, who was converting it into high-end apartments across from the Barclays Center. I called Magic Johnson's organization. I said, have you found any incidences of mercury cleanup in the building? And he said, yeah, we had 2 suites where we had to do mercury cleanup. I said, have you checked where the sewer line hits the main? They said, no. I said, go check down there, because the mercury sludge that's down there is going to be backing up through the drain lines in the building into every suite in your new high-rise, high-end condos, right? They said, okay. I said, do you mind if I call you back in 2 months and find out what you found? They said, absolutely not. Called the guy back. $3 million remediation. That is the cupola of the building. And I was called in. There was a daycare in southern Jersey, a little bit past, about 50 miles past me, where students were starting to have some symptoms, and they came in and they found out that what the building had been was a thermometer factory. And the EPA from the state somehow scratched it off the list of places that needed to be remediated. And anybody know who this is? This is who I called in to do it because this was outside my, yeah. So Aaron Brockovich handled that for them. And so if you've got separators on your building now, make sure you change them on a regular basis. The cartridges need to be changed because once the cartridges fill up, everything goes out to the street. DRNA found a way to make a cartridge for the Solumetics separator, sell it for a whole less money than you can get through a dealer. Everything's done by mail, and the company that is going to be buying DRNA out, hopefully, in 2 years, is the largest refiner of metals in Europe. So they want the metals. We don't have to pay. If you have the DRNA separator, you don't have to pay for shipping. You don't have to pay for refining. You don't have to pay anything. And the cartridges are a whole lot less than buying through your dealer. And it's like changing a Schick. It's like you've got a Schick handle. You can put a Gillette razor on it. So yeah, Solumetics forgot to patent their. Yeah, so it's been an interesting ride. And Tom McGuire's site and the IAOMT site are major sources for referrals of new patients who are looking for this. The IAOMT qualifies the dentist. So I would strongly suggest if you haven't been to an IAOMT meeting, go to an IAOMT meeting. You'll get more than 20 minutes on the first time you go for an all-day meeting that's just about mercury, which should have happened when you were in dental school. Any questions?
What's your company again?
What?
The company again?
DRNA.com.
So Steve, the IBDM also has a valve removal protocol, and so that's another resource for people.
Who's that?
The IBDM,
Which is?
International Academy of
I have a slide on it.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, there's going to be a lot of follow-up on this, and if you have questions, I will be here.
What is the date for compliance?
Compliance is the 14th of July coming up.
2020.
Yeah, and if you had a 3-year window, they notified on the 14th of July in 17. Of course, the ADA didn't cover that. Most members of the ADA don't know a darn thing about it. So if you're going to try to build that section of your practice, be an early adopter and start bragging on yourself. And get your assistants to start saying, "Oh, that's so much nicer than amalgam. Look at the. How'd you stain that groove that way?" Been my pleasure.